Buyers, this one is for you. We are talking about the buyer broker agreement. And I want to make this video because recently I have had quite a few new buyers who I've started to work with. And in order to take them out, I have to have the buyer broker agreement signed. That creates a little bit of friction right up front when I've met you one time. Maybe I've had a few text exchanges, a few phone calls with you. I've never had a meal with you. Why should you trust me? How do you know you're going to be good at your job? And then all of a sudden you want me to sign something that says I'm going to owe you 3% if the seller doesn't pay. So I want to talk about how things used to be, kind of like the old model of commission. I want to talk about how it is today. I want to talk about what it is on paper versus what it is in real life. I have 2 pages of notes here. So if I'm looking down or I pause to collect some thoughts, just bear with me because it's important to me that this is fruitful and it's very clear. I also want to provide some real life examples. And as you know, I always like to weave in and out the buyer side and the seller side so that you guys can understand. So my name is Lauren House. I work in Scottsdale, Arizona and Miami, Florida. I have been selling real estate since 2008. I have also worked in commercial real estate, and I am also licensed in California, but do not currently work there. It's inactive. So I can really only speak to the Arizona buyer broker agreement and the Florida buyer broker agreement because those are the only 2 that I've actually seen and worked with in real life. Now, if you are not in either of those cities, you can watch this video, gather your thoughts and notes, and then take that to the professional that you're working with. Or if you don't have anybody you're working with, there is a link down below in the description box, and you can click to fill out your name and what you're looking for, what city you live in, so I can connect you with somebody who is a trusted advisor who I've highly vetted and works just like me. So as a buyer, you are now thinking, why do I have to sign something to go see a house? And I understand it's not comfortable when I come at you with this agreement asking you to pay me if the seller does not. So how did it used to be? The old model was that the seller paid the buyer's agent, the buyer's real estate agent, their commission. In the MLS, it was revealed how much the seller was paying the buyer's real estate agent. In the MLS, at least in Arizona, there was even a box that you could check to include only X amount and higher. So nobody knows who's doing what in their MLS because it's all our own private information. No one is privy to it. Nobody's going in there. But you could set your commission to 2.5% or higher. Back in the day, it was mainly 3%. There weren't a whole lot of 2%. I would say ever since COVID, it's really become casual and there's a lot more 2% now. Sorry, 2.5% now. But on occasion, back in the day, there were people who were only offering 2%. And so you could set that in the MLS as a parameter. So I know that people have been sent listings by their clients, by the buyers, and they're like, oh, we want to see this house. And it says 2%. And it just sucks because it's a lot of work. You know, there's no guarantee you're going to get paid. And you're like, okay, so I'm just like, I'm just getting ripped off at 1%. And that's because buyer broker agreements were not popular. Yes, people used them, but there still is a loophole in there. And I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty, but there was a loophole in there, and there still is, that there's a way around it. And so I personally started to write into mine a cancellation policy because it made people feel more comfortable. So that was how things used to go. Now, in the MLS, we cannot see, because they removed it, how much a seller is offering. So as of August 1st, 2024, this new practice, law, requirement, I should have looked this up before if it's a law or not, came into effect. As of August 1st, 2024, we now as real estate agents have to have this conversation upfront about commission with our buyer, and they have to sign this in order to go out and see houses. Now, is somebody going around and looking into every file that I have to see if I have a buyer broker signed? No. But on multiple occasions, because I am a handshake person, I didn't get it signed because I'm thinking, Okay, I'm still operating in my old ways. And sure enough, they went and found something without me. And had I had that signed, I would have had to be paid. So it really does protect the real estate agent for that percentage of the commission. But it's really hard to get someone to sign it if they haven't worked with you in the past, if they're not referred to you, and it's just like this cold lead that you get over the phone or you're door knocking or open house. And so that's where the friction comes in, because what it does is it's formalizing the representation of a buyer. The buyer now has the hard conversation of how much I'm going to pay you if the seller doesn't pay you. But the seller in real life is still paying the buyer's agent. And because of that, what's happening in real life and what's happening on paper are two very different things. So, because of all the litigation and people feeling that there was steering going on by the real estate agents only to homes that were paying 2.5 or 3%, that is why the National Association of Realtors, NAR, who clearly doesn't have our back, has put this into effect. It really irritates me that they don't have our back, but they force us to be part of NAR. I think that's BS. So we have this signed, and if there were to be an audit from the NAR or from your brokerage and you don't have it signed, there is a hefty fine. So it's kind of like coming from the top that we have to have it signed. The problem is that it feels aggressive up front. And to those who have been buying and selling real estate for many years and decades, it's very known and it's very comfortable for a buyer to be represented by a buyer's real estate agent, and the seller pays them. And then when that buyer becomes the seller, then the seller pays their buyer's agent. And it's just a cyclical thing. You just kind of in your head feel like you get it for free on one side and then you pay it forward on the next side. And I've had multiple seasoned sellers say that, and how they don't really agree with this because they like the old way. It like I said, it felt free, but it's not, because at the end of the day, the old model, if you will, which we're still operating like that in real life, the old model just had the real estate commissions built into the price. So now that it is negotiable and the seller doesn't have to pay the buyer's real estate agent, it's just more paperwork. But what I do like about it is that it forms that steady relationship with the buyer. So one thing buyers you should do is, like I said, make sure that your real estate agent has a cancellation policy in there. And you need to make sure that they give you their bottom line. So typically, my buyer brokers will have a 6-month period that we're working together, the cancellation policy. And then the third thing I put in there is the buyer does not have to make up the difference of 2.5% or higher. That means if the commission that the commission that the seller is offering is 2.5%, the buyer is off the hook. We're good. If the seller is not paying anything, 1%, 1.5%, or 2%, then the buyer has to make up the difference. Now, what does that look like in real life? That turns into the buyer offering less to the seller because the buyer has to make up the difference for their real estate commission. So it's coming out in different ways, and it's either coming off the purchase price or added into the purchase price, depending on which side you're on. Buyers also now have much more power to tell their real estate agent, find out how much that seller is offering you. And if it's not to my liking, then we're not going to see the house. There still is steering involved, which I think is what really irritates me, is because this was meant to mitigate steering, and instead it's just verbal instead of written, but it still is steering because the buyer doesn't want to pay for it, because everybody still has that old school mentality that the buyer's agent works for free. It's not for free, but that's how a buyer feels. So that's kind of the difference. And I've only had, for real life experience, I have had one buyer not work with me because of what the buyer broker agreement states. He had his lawyer look at it. His lawyer told him, well, if the seller doesn't compensate her, then you are responsible for the 2.5% or higher. And I said, well, I just want to let you know that I can find out from every single house that we go see how much they're offering. And if they're offering less than 2.5%, then we don't see those. And I understand, like maybe that's the house that you want. So he ended up not signing it. I was totally fine with it. So in a year and a half, I've had one person not sign it. Also, in a year and a half, I've only had one buyer actually pay my commission. So that was an asking price of $5.9 million. My buyer and I could only find comps for $5.3 million. We went back and forth, dancing around, trying to find a purchase price that was amenable to both the buyer and the seller. And eventually the seller came back and said, listen, I'll give you the 5.3 if you pay your real estate agent's commission. So he and I had a conversation and we did the math. It was actually cheaper for my buyer to pay for my real estate commission off of the 5.3 instead of him paying the purchase price that the seller was asking, which was closer to 5.5. Easy, done deal. And guess what? He and I are in the middle of our second $6 million transaction. Like that's how it works. If I take a haircut, it's because I'm preserving my relationship. If you send me a lot of business, I'm preserving our relationship by also taking a haircut on my commission. I do think that there is a huge value add that it is a negotiable fee because it allows the relationship to go further. Now, if you're somebody who's just wanting a deal and you still expect me to do top notch, you treat me like crap, I'm not going to take a haircut. Like if I cold called you, it's 3%. If I door knocked you, it's 3%. Just because you're a referral doesn't mean that you get a discount. You know, the first time you work with somebody, I still have to put my best foot forward. And a lot of people want this top-notch 3% real estate agent to work for 1%. To some people, that's okay. Other people say, no, I'm charging 4%. And that's why this is flexible. And it's all how every individual real estate agent wants to run their business. What's important to them? How do they preserve their relationships? If they just want volume, they're doing everything at 1%. They don't really care. If they want repeat business, then they're fine tooth combing. I don't know. There's something like that. They are looking closely at the numbers to understand like, okay, if you're going to be a long-term real estate agent, a long-term client while I'm a real estate agent, then I absolutely want to do you a favor because you're bringing all your business to me. And then on top of it, I have some VIP clients who will only pay me 3%. And every time I try to give a discount or take him to lunch, he's like, Lauren, no, like you work really hard for me. So you just have all sorts of different personalities that are coming at you as a real estate agent, and you have to figure out what works for you, who you want to work with. Are they working with you for the right reason, the wrong reason? Are they actually friends? I mean, there's so much that goes into it. That's real life. Those are my two examples. Okay. So this, what's changed? The buyer, okay. You guys wouldn't know this because you can't see inside the MLS, but the buyer compensation is no longer allowed to go into the MLS, which is why we have to ask the seller's agent, how much is the seller offering? There's no visual of it. So because of this, we have the written agreement from the buyer to the seller. Again, going back to what it looks like on paper, it looks like the buyer is responsible because the buyer is responsible if the seller doesn't pay. But the real life here is that the seller is paying all of the buyer real estate commissions. Now, if you're a seller, I'm going to tell you this right now. If you are a seller who's not willing to offer 2.5% or 3%, which means you're offering 2% or less or nothing at all, you are definitely going to be the black sheep, and buyers will 100% walk away from it. Buyers are, again, they're still not in this mentality that they want to pay for the service, even though they technically are paying it. They just don't feel like it's coming out of their pocket directly. Therefore, sellers still have the responsibility of paying the buyer's agent. But if they offer less than 2.5, I can promise you it will kill the deal. That might not be the reason. It could be the price. It could be terms. That could be part of it. But that's just one more expense to the buyer. And sellers, you all know because you've been a buyer because you bought that house. Every seller, sorry, every buyer just wants a good deal. They're going to ask. Sellers, don't get offended by offers. That's a whole different video. I'll make that video too. But sellers need to keep in mind, excuse me, sellers need to keep in mind that they are paying the buyer's real estate agent no matter what, like regardless if things have changed. Unless you have a very specific scenario like the one I gave you where we got $600,000 off of the list price and it worked for both of us and it ended up being cheaper for the buyer in the end. That's also a very ultra luxury price point that the buyer had the money to pay me. Not every buyer has the money to come out of pocket and pay their real estate agent. So that's the other asterisk here. So sellers, when you are thinking about commission that's being paid to the buyer's real estate agent, I just went through this with somebody who we received an offer on our listing and the buyer's real estate agent put into the seller compensation addendum 3.5%. And they were, you're probably watching this. So thanks for letting me use you as an example. They were, no, we're doing 2.5. And I went back and I did the math and it was $4,000 more to give them the 3%. There were two real estate agents, which I kind of think is why they were asking for 3.5, which obviously that's not my fault, the seller's fault, anybody's fault. Like you guys decided to be a team, so go be a team. But we ended up giving them the $4,000. We ended up countering at 3% instead of 2.5% because we felt that it would push the deal further along. And that's an item that will move the needle. The buyer's agent is going to fight harder because they are getting a great commission. And so I think that there may be a little bit of lost value when sellers are looking at what they should pay a buyer's agent. And it's the easiest to negotiate off of your plate as the seller because you're not working with the buyer's agent. The buyer's agent is working for the buyer and they're doing all of their work with showings and everything that they need to do. So it kind of I understand why a seller's like, why do I have to pay for this? But because that is still the norm, the ritual and the practice, the traditional way of selling real estate right now, if you don't offer a seller commission, a buyer broker commission as the seller, you're going to be in the trash. Like people are going to walk away. They're not going to be interested in working with you. So, okay. This is so much information. All right. So what is a buyer broker agreement? The buyer broker agreement is a contract defining representation, and it outlines the duties, loyalties, and our favorite word, fiduciary obligations and responsibilities. And obviously it explains the time that they're working together, the amount of money that is going to be owed to the buyer's real estate agent. It's just a formalization of the relationship as what we said. So it is a sticky point, I guess would be it. How do I want to say this? It's just, like I said earlier, it's just really easy for the seller to say, I don't want to pay that because it is one more expense. But the truth is, if you want to be in the game, then you have to pay it. And a buyer should also know that they shouldn't walk away from a house, in my opinion, again, over $4,000 for paying their buyer's agent. And I know that it's one more expense to the buyer, but you're buying a house. Like you wouldn't be able to do that without that person. And if they are truly working hard for you, if they have your best interest at heart, if they are on time and communicating and you just overall have a trust and respect for that person, like why wouldn't they deserve to be paid 3%? It shouldn't be, the real estate agent shouldn't be at fault for working their hardest to bring you, the seller, and to represent you, the buyer, just because somebody doesn't feel like paying them or you feel like they get paid too much. Obviously a new agent I can see why you would feel like they don't really deserve their full commission. Oh my gosh, don't tell anybody I said that. Because they don't sound confident on the phone. They don't know how to negotiate. Their best interest is to keep it together for their bank account. But when you have somebody who's seasoned and who knows and like can navigate all of that, you're paying for their experience. You're paying them. And obviously, you hired them for a reason. It's because you respect them, it's because you trust them, and it's because they probably came highly recommended to you. And if that is the case, you would not pay your lawyer or pay your doctor, and I think because real estate just has such a bad rap, it's easy to say, oh, well, why don't you just chip in $5,000 from your commission because you're making so much? And it's like, the reason I'm making so much is because I have 18 years experience. Like, do you not think that that makes sense? So it's a blurry line. It's a hard topic to talk about. And I always feel the resistance over the phone. I actually just had this conversation last week. And it it's a hard conversation that really never gets easier because I don't know what personality I'm dealing with on the other side. And no matter how nice and friendly and like helpful I am to try and make sure that you feel comfortable as the buyer, they're still at the end of the day signing a 3% agreement. So there's nothing I can do about that. Again, I'm trying to avoid getting fined. I'm trying to follow the rules of NAR, National Association of Realtors. I have to abide by the rules that my broker puts on me. I'm all the way at the bottom. And the thing about the compensation for either agent, but we'll just stick with the buyer's agent for this one, you don't know if they have a referral fee to pay on that. You don't know how much their brokerage split is. You don't know what they're paying for, whether it's marketing, especially on the sell side, if they have an assistant or they have team members. Like, there at some point needs to be some meat on the bone in order for it to make sense for the buyer to work for you, right? So again, if the person is doing a volume game where everything is 1%, then they probably have 45 listings and it's 1% on everything. Therefore, they're doing volume. But for the people who want to have a relationship-based business, then that's when it becomes, I want to do a good job for you, but it can become tit for tat if it's like, well, you only want to pay me this, but you expect me to work extra hard because I know you. There's a lot of hairy, blurred lines in there, as we know. And I don't want to go into like defending real estate agents too much because I do know that most of them kind of suck. That's why I try to do my best to stand out from everybody else. I reflect upon every transaction that I have because I want to make sure that my clients are happy and that they see that I'm improving myself as a business person so that when they've worked with me for 10 years, we can look back and be like, oh, remember when you were still new and this is what happened? And it's like, yeah, I've learned from that. So, this is the buyer broker agreement. It is one thing on paper and it is something totally different in real life. And I can not speak to any other states other than Scottsdale, Arizona, and Miami, Florida. It is business as usual. Nothing has changed unless there is an exceptional situation that requires the buyer's agent to be paid by their buyer, like the example I gave earlier. That's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. It actually is a great negotiating tool. Like, hey, buyer, I'm happy to give you your low price, but I'm not paying your agent. You pay them. Done. If it makes more sense to the buyer, then take it. I don't know why you wouldn't. So the buyer broker agreement didn't create commitment. It revealed it. The people who won't sign it are the people who might not be that serious, or maybe they're just not that serious about that real estate agent. And that's fine, because the person that feels you are meant to work with, you will be happy to commit and happy to sign that. And you know that you're going to follow through as the buyer from start to finish. So I hope this helped clear up some questions that you have. Feel free to drop more questions in here. Send me an email, whatever you want to do. If I missed anything, I feel like I covered a lot, and I know it is a lot, but I just wanted to go over that with you. So thank you for your time and attention.